Hello, I'm Feline Perrin. I am a Power Platform lead at Capgemini Belgium, and I will tell you something about ALM. So welcome to the Powerful Devs Conference. In this session, I will talk about the different flavors of ALM in the Power Platform and discuss which tool is best for you when using ALM. So let's first start off with what ALM actually is. Then let's look at some basic concepts within the Power Platform and then dive into the different tools that are available within the Power Platform and which one you should use when. So what is ALM? If we look at the definition of ALM, then you can find something like this on the internet, stating that application lifecycle management is an integrated system of people, tools, and processes that supervise a software application from its initial planning and development through the testing and maintenance and into decommissioning and retirement. So what does it say? Well, it tells us that there are people involved, tools involved, processes involved, and that it covers the full life cycle of application. So the moment that you start thinking about an application, the moment that you have an idea, that's basically when your ALM starts, all the way until you develop it, you build it, you test it, you bring it live, but also at the moment that you decide that the application is no longer needed. So there are a few key areas. So first of all, governance might be an area. You are going to do things like requirement management. If you have an idea for an application, you need to know the requirements. You need some change management because, of course, you want people to use the application. You need to consider security and so on. Another area is your development area. You're going to design your application, you're going to build it, and then you're going to test it. And then, of course, you also have your maintenance phase where you're going to deploy it to different environments so that different groups of people can test it, for example. Then you can deploy it to production environments where you then share it with all the users that need access to it. So you also need to take into account your release management. If we now move to the Power Platform, let's first discuss some basic concepts that you need to understand. So first of all, you need to understand solutions because solutions are really the mechanism to make sure that we can implement ALM. They are basically the mechanism that allows us to distribute components, and components can be anything from applications like Canvas apps or model-driven apps to Power Automate flows, chatbots, plugins, and so on. So all the things that you can create within the Power Platform. You also need a Dataverse, which is not only the database, for example, for your application, but it will also store all the artifacts, and it will even store in product deployments, things like pipelines in Power Platform. They also need source control because you need a source of truth. You need a way to know what the latest version is of your application. You need to store it so that you can also revert back to it, that it's kind of your backup basically, and it can also help you collaborate on the different components that you create. And then lastly, you will need a continuous integration and continuous delivery system, such as Azure DevOps, that will allow you to automate build, test, and deployment actions. So if we want to do ALM right, we also need different environments. And for that, we need an environment strategy. Basically, you need at least 3 different environments. And since this is kind of a team-based session, I have also tried to visualize these environments like planets. So the first thing that you need is a development environment. This is the place where you're going to build your application. This can, for example, be our lovely Earth. We know our lovely Earth, and this is a place where we are going to, for example, build our rockets. So this is where we build our applications, our flows, our shards, and everything that we want to make available. Then you will need a test environment. A place where you can experiment on certain things. It can be, for example, the moon. We've already been to the moon, so we kind of know it there. And here we will test out the application. We will share it with a set of users that are also going to test how the application reacts and whether it really corresponds with the requirements. And then the final step or final destination can, for example, be Mars. our production environment where we'll make our application available to all the users that need to use that application. We also talked about solutions, that it's important or an important fundamental for ALM. Well, you can also think about which strategy that you want to implement for your solution. So as mentioned before, your solution contains components, and these components can be, for example, Power Apps, which can be your core application, but you can also include Power Automate flows that will help you in that application, that will do some automation, for example, in the backend. Apart from these components, you can also have some more supporting components like environment variables and connection references, which are really going to help us when we're going to deploy our solution to different environments. So, for example, or most likely, your application will have data, and that data will be different depending on the different environments that you're working on. To make sure that you can seamlessly deploy your application to these different environments, you don't have to open up your application and switch the connection to your Dataverse tables or your SharePoint lists. You can use environment variables and then change the value of the reference that you're basically using when you deploy it to your different environments, so that it's linked to the right table at the moment that you're looking in your application on the test environment. Same goes for connection references. They're also environment specific. So with the connection reference on top of your connection, you can switch your connection or change the value of your connection depending on which environment that you're deploying to. These are very simple components, so you can decide to put all these different components into one solution, which is also the best practice. It's the easiest way. But if you have more complex situations, you might decide to split up your different components into different solutions. So, for example, you might split up the first part, the Power App and the Power Automate flows, in a separate Power Apps solution or your core application solution, and then have a different solution for your environment-specific things. This might be helpful if you, for example, use those environment variables and connection references within different applications and you want to change them separately from your application. Do take into account that by splitting this up into different solutions, you also create dependencies between those solutions. So in this case, your environment solution needs to be deployed before you can deploy your Power App solution. So it creates some extra complexity. So do take that into account when you build out your solution strategy. If we bring it all together now, our environment solution and our our environment strategy and our solution strategy, then we can build out our deployment flow. So in this case, we have our Power Platform solution that we have built on our development environment. It can be the Rocket that we have built. Then we're going to create an artifact. In our case, it will be exporting the solution, which contains all the components. That's what we call securing a build. And then we're going to deploy that artifact and release it to different environments. You can choose to release it to a separate development environment where you're going to maybe do some merges or some extra tests. Or if you have a strategy where you first export your solution as unmanaged, put it into an intermediate dev environment, and then export it from there as a managed solution, that could be a possibility as well. Or you can also directly release it to test. And then finally, we want to release it and we want to make it available on production. So this is the main flow that we will follow when we're going to do our deployments. If we now look at the different tools that we have available, then the first tool that we're going to talk about is pipelines in Power Platform. If you look at the documentation, then it tells you this. So pipelines in Power Platform aims to democratize application lifecycle management for Power Platform and Dynamics 365 customers by bringing ALM automation and continuous integration and continuous delivery capabilities into the service in a manner that's more approachable for all makers, admins, and developers. So it really tries to democratize the ALM system, and it's targeted towards makers, admins, and developers. So for the admins, what it tries to do, it gives you an application to centrally govern and manage these pipelines by using the deployment pipeline configuration app. For the makers, it becomes easier for them to run pipelines from within the solution. So from within the platform that they're already used to, that they're already working on, they can just stay there, press a button and release their application or their solution to different environments. And for developers, there's a way to extend these pipelines. So let's now have a look. So here I have the deployment pipeline configuration open. So this is where the admin can govern and manage the different pipelines. They have an overview with pipeline dashboards where they have where they can see which pipelines were successful, failed, and so on. And within the setup, they can set up the different environments. So here I have set up a dev environment, a production environment, and a test environment. And I can create a new environment. I can give it a name, I can give it an owner, and then I can select which type of environment this is. So you have two types. You have your development environment. This is the place that you're going to export from. So this is the place where you are actively developing on, where you're actively building the application. And then the other option is the target environment. These are all the other environments that you're going to deploy the application to. Now, do take into account that your target environments need to be enabled as a managed environment. You can give it a meaningful description, and then you can save it, and then you can use these different environments within a pipeline. So if I open up a showcase pipeline that I've already set up, then I have some pipeline details here. So I give it a name that's useful, a name that's meaningful to me. I give it a description, and then I have some possibilities. So I can enable AI deployment nodes. In this case, AI is going to help me to write deployment nodes, so I don't have to do it myself. And then I can also allow to redeploy older versions. So if I want to revert back or something, then I can enable or disable it here by stating where or not I can go back or redeploy old versions. Then here I have my deployment environments that are linked. So in this case, I have already linked my dev environment. I also have the possibility to, from here, either create a new development environment or add an existing development environment. And then I have the different stages. So these are the different environments from my deployment process that we have seen in the slides. And here I have a stage, for example, the to test stage. If I open this up, then I have here on top my pipeline details. Here I have the name of the stage, the owner, some description, the deployment pipeline that it's connected to. And then with the previous deployment stage, I can build out that process that we have seen. So I can say, okay, this stage needs to happen only after the previous stage has run. So in the example, I want to go from dev to test and then to production. So in this case, there's no previous deployment stage, but the stage to production has the previous deployment stage of to test. I can link it to a target deployment. So in this case, a deployment environment. So in this case, it's going to deploy to test, but I can also deploy it to prod. I can search here for the different environments that I have available. And then there are some checkboxes that I can check. If I want to have a pre-export step that's required or a pre-deployment step. So if we want to deploy something, we will export the solution, and I can make sure that there needs to happen something before I do the export, or something happens before I do the deployment onto a different environment. So this is how you set up the stages, and then by building out these different stages. So if I open the to production, I have here as my previous deployment step, the to test. I can link these different environments to each other and build out my deployment process. Now, if we look at the pipelines from a perspective of a maker, how will a maker work with this? Well, here I am in my solution. So this is the overview of my solution. It's a very simple solution. I have only one component, but I have this rocket icon, which shows me that I can use pipelines. And here I can then select one of the pipelines that's, for example, configured. And here I have these different stages that I can deploy to. So in this case, I can deploy my application from dev to test by selecting deploy here. I can then say, okay, I want to do it right now, or I want to schedule it for later. I can just do it right now. And then that AI feature is going to, in the backend, create deployment notes so I don't have to write them out myself. If I have environment variables, it will also request me to enter the GUID of the environment variables to use in the target environment. So here you have the deployment nodes, and then when everything is ready, I can say deploy, and the solution will then be deployed and later on will be available on test or on production. If I want to extend these pipelines, I can do so by creating Power Automate flows. So with the Dataverse trigger on the category Power Platform Pipelines, I have multiple actions where I can trigger on. In this case, I have chosen, for example, the on deployment requested. And this is a very simple example where I just start an approval flow. I request my admin to approve it. And then based on the condition, I will send something back. For example, if it's successful, I will send status 20 back. If it's failed, I will send status 30 back so that the pipeline knows whether it was successful and it can proceed. So as you can see, it's towards makers because it's very easy. They just stay within the solution. Admins, they can govern the pipelines very easily in one application. And if you want to do more exotic stuff, then you can extend it by creating Power Automate flows integrated with GitHub Actions and so on. But this is not the only tool that's available to us. We also have, for example, Azure DevOps, which is more targeted towards developers. So this is a specific tool that that's really there for more DevOps-related things. Now, if I want to use it in a Power Platform context, then I can use the Power Platform build tools. And as described in the documentation, with these Power Platform build tools, which include common build and deployment tasks related to apps built on a Power Platform, Microsoft Power Platform, they can be automated. So these tasks can include things like synchronizing solution metadata, generating build artifacts, deploying downstream environments, provisioning or deprovisioning environments, performing static analysis, and so on. So as you see, there's much more available than just the deployment phase. So it's much more than just building an artifact and releasing it. I can do more from the ALM perspective, like setting up environments when I need them and doing some automated testing, for example, within Azure DevOps. I could have also chosen GitHub Actions. That's also a possibility, but for this example, I've chosen Azure DevOps. And as you can see, these build tools can be divided into different categories, going from the initialization phase, for example, where you provision environments, where you deploy dependencies that might be needed. You pack source control or source code if you have a code on your repository, for example. You have your build, where you can run some automated testing, run the solution checker, export your solution, and so on. And then you have more release-specific actions like packing solutions, running integration testing, importing your solutions then and making them available on different environments. So let's also have a look at how Azure DevOps looks. So here I have Azure DevOps available or open. As you can see, it's immediately a different platform, a different tool. So a steeper learning curve to learn it for the person that's responsible for the DevOps. Azure DevOps can do much more than only deployment. You have boards available, test plans, and so on. But if we now focus on what we did within the pipelines in Power Platform, how that will translate to your Azure DevOps, then you can build pipelines and release pipelines. You have the possibility to use YAML, or you have the possibility to use the classic editor. I've chosen the classic editor because it's a bit more visual. And here I have a build pipeline. So you can really split up the deployment into building the artifact and then releasing the artifact separately. Here, this icon shows me that I'm using the build tools. And if I want to add a new task and I search for Power Platform, then you can see all the build tools actions that are available, going from importing solutions to backing up environments and so on. So a lot that's available for you. If I then look at a very, very simple build pipeline, then I start out by using the tool installer to make sure that my agent can use these Power Platform tasks. Then I have the export solution, just as I would do manually. I have the solution on my dev environment. I want to export it. I would then have a zip file. So here, if you look at the parameters that you need to enter for the export solution, you need a way to authenticate. The best practice is to use the service principal with a client secret. And I have multiple service connections for my different environments. I need to point it to the solution that I want to export. So in this case, I will use the reporting solution. I can also add a parameter here if I want to make it more dynamic. I can, with this checkbox, choose to export it as unmanaged or as managed. And then I can, if I have this zip file available, unpack that solution and push it, for example, to my repository. So with the unpack action, I can point it to the target folder. I can say how or which type of solution I want to unpack. Do I want to unpack both the managed and unmanaged, or do I want to unpack it as managed or unmanaged? And then I can publish the artifacts, put it in a drop so that I can use it later on, or with this command line script, I make the unpacked solution. I push it to my repository here on Azure DevOps. If I then look at the release pipeline, I have the full pipeline with my artifact, which is kind of the input of my release pipeline. It can be an artifact that I've created in build pipeline earlier. It can be the repository. So in this case, I'm linking it to the repository because I have unpacked my solution and pushed it to a repository. Here I have my different stages, just as we had with the pipelines in Power Platform, the 2 tests and the 2 production. And if I then go into one of these stages, I have a couple of tasks. So once again, I start with the tool installer. And then what I will do is I will pack my solution. So what I have on my repository, here I link it to where it's stored on my repository. I will pack it again into a zip file. I will tell it which solution output file I have, whether I want to pack it as managed, unmanaged, or both. And then I will import this solution into one of my environments. In this case, it will be my test environment. Here I also have the possibility to add a deployment settings file, and this is the file where you will give the values for the environment variables and the connection references. So as you can see, there's much more available within Azure DevOps. I now showed you the Power Platform build tools, but you can use scripts if you want to. You can do much more pro-code related stuff, basically everything that's possible within Azure DevOps. You can automate testing, for example, so a lot that's available for you within Azure DevOps. But those are not the only 2 possibilities. I also have the ALM accelerator. So what about that? Well, it looks something like this. So what is the ALM accelerator? Well, behind the scenes, it also uses Azure DevOps pipelines, but there's a nice application built on top of it so that our makers can also stay within the Power Platform and interact with this application. So here they have an overview of the different solutions. They can commit their solution, they can deploy their solution, and so on. And behind the scenes, Azure DevOps pipeline will do the work. Also for the admin part, there's also a nice application built for them. So the setup, it's a bit harder because you still have to understand these Azure DevOps pipelines. Certainly, if you want to make some adjustments and you want to personalize it or customize it. But once it's set up, you also have this nice application where you can do the management of your Azure DevOps, where you can see the different projects that you have, the different pipelines or repositories where you can create and manage your service connections. So it's a really nice tool that you can then later on use when you have done the hard work, the setup. So if we want to compare all of them, we can put them on a line going from simple tools more towards makers, maybe even more citizen dev, more out-of-the-box solutions, all the way until hard, complex, customized applications, maybe including a bit more Fusion Dev or Pro Dev. So on the simple side, we have the pipelines in Power Platform, which is really for very simple pipelines, easy for makers, ideally for citizen development. On the other side, on the hard side, we have Azure DevOps, where the sky is the limit. We can customize it any way we want. We can add scripts, we can add whatever we want to build out the deployment that we need if we include Pro Dev components, for example. And then somewhere in between, we have the ALM accelerator, which uses the power of Azure DevOps, but try to make it as simple or as easy as possible by creating or by giving you that application within the Power Platform to work with the underlying Azure DevOps pipelines. So as a conclusion, if there are three things that you need to remember from this session, then it's first of all that ALM is a system for people to work together from the ID of an application until the retirement of it. So ALM covers everything from the ID that from the moment that you have an ID for an application all the way until you no longer need the application. You have pipelines in Power Platform, which really tries to democratize the deployment and makes it available for makers, tries to make it easy for admins as well, tries to contain it all into the Power Platform that you already are familiar with, that you're already using. And then you have Azure DevOps, which gives you the full flexibility where you can automate whatever you want. You can automate development, you can automate testing, you can automate deployment, and then know that you have also a solution that's kind of in between them. So I also have some resources. So if you want to dive a little bit more into the possibilities, then you can check out the resources. And with that, I want to thank you and enjoy the rest of the conference.